So, hey, y'all, welcome back to another episode of our podcast. I'm Andréa.
I'm Christopher.
And we are two friends who love each other and believe that it is vitally important for us to talk about race in America and beyond.
And there's going to be a lot of beyond in this podcast today.
Yes. And I'm actually really excited about today's topic because it's one that the term itself has been around for, I believe, 1970. It became popular in around 1982, 1984 by Alice Walker, author of The Color Purple, and a bunch of other amazing short poems and stories and all of that. But it hasn't gotten much play. And I'll get off into that a little bit later. But today we're going to be talking about colorism. How does that make you feel, Christopher?
It makes me feel curious because, my entire frame of reference for colorism is actually more South Africa than it is the US. Mm-hmm. Because I've spent a lot of time there. And the topic is still very prominent and very much a discussion today. And so I'm really curious to understand from you a lot more in the sort of the American perspective.
Yay. And we've already discussed that, you spent most of your adult years like not living in America. So that's why your perspective is broader than just the American perspective on race and racism and all of that. So I just wanted to put it out there for listeners who skipped the episode that we talked about that.
And we also discussed in past podcasts that you and I are not experts on this topic, but we are just people who think it's really, really important. And if nothing else, what we really want to do is model how it is that you can respectfully and lovingly discuss topics of race and racism. And some of them are about how white people treat people of color. And today we're going to go into another aspect of that, which is, how different peoples of color relate to one another. And I think for me as a white person, that's something that I do need to understand. And it is my issue because I'm a human being and I should care, right?
Yes, absolutely. So colorism. And I'm glad you brought up the part about like the expert, because neither one of us are experts. We're just very curious on the idea of humanism, right? Things that make us human. And part of being human, it is curiosity and this thirst for information, for knowledge, for growth and for evolution. And so colorism is, to put it simply, is where people of color or in different ethnic groups actually discriminate against one another. And the idea of colorism is not exclusive to like Black and brown folks. Colorism exists in the Asian culture. It exists in the like Italian Sicilian culture. So even in white culture, right? Italy's in Europe. It exists in different ethnic communities. And it actually also exists in white culture and European cultures, right? And so this idea of colorism is not exclusive just to people of color, and it's not exclusive to Americans because, like you said, your perspective is more the South African approach, which is interesting because like when you think about the South African approach to colorism, you have the Chinese who were considered colored in South Africa. And then you have the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Taiwanese who were considered white people when it comes to the apartheid system in South Africa. And so if you think about it from like an Asian perspective, and even Chinese people have argued this with apartheid in South Africa, is that Chinese people are actually lighter than Japanese and even Taiwanese. So why are we considered colored, right? And so again, I said that to prove the point that it's not just something that affects Black people or Mexicans or Cubans or, Puerto Ricans. Again, this impacts all of us. And the number one reason why it does, Christopher, is because all of us, every single last one of us, have been indoctrinated in whiteness. where it's this belief that white is right and white is the trophy, if you will, and whiteness is something that should be lived up to and should be attained. And of course, we know that that is a lie. It's not necessarily true, but that is where colorism actually stems from. And again, is not necessary. And I have to keep repeating this because I don't want our listeners to think that, oh, wait, they're talking about only Black people and, brown people, and it's not important to us. And I don't need to listen to this. I want to skip this episode. Colorism happens also in European cultures as well.
Well, and it takes different forms beyond just the amount of melanin that you might have in your skin as well. I think what we're talking about here, if I try and break it down for myself, is absolutely, incontrovertibly, almost everywhere in the world, whether it's here or South Africa, whiteness is at the center. And that's what we're here. That's our mission, to talk about this, to talk about why that must not any longer be the case.
Right.
But I think as a result of that, as the result of white supremacy and white being at the center, and that's what I mean by white supremacy, is being constantly oppressively at the center of everything, is that, people of color or people who are oppressed by that system look at it and say, okay, so, I'm not getting a great deal here. And I want to feel better about myself, which is a natural human tendency. So who else can I oppress in my environment so that I don't feel like I'm at the bottom of the food chain here? And it might sound horrible, but I think it's a natural human reaction to that, but it's something that we have to make ourselves aware of. And it's another one of those, I think, products of white centricity in our society that we have to deconstruct, break down, and get rid of.
And I don't know so much that is, who is it that I can oppress? That's the driving factor behind it, because of course, that is, that's a part of it. But if you think about, when we look at, or it used to be back in the day, right? When you would look at certain people of stature or whatever, and you see that it's everyone with the lighter skin or the fairer skin, you're not necessarily thinking, who can I oppress? You're thinking, how can I be more like that? Because that is the example that I see. Now, as a result of wanting to be like that, oppression may happen in the process, but oppression is not the driving force behind colorism and what we're dealing with today. I just want to make that clear for anybody who thinks that, who misunderstands what you're saying.
For me, it's about a process of all of us as human beings wanting to climb to the top as much as we can. I think we as white people, at least in America and in other parts of the world, have set that up as the game to play. We've set that up as the system. We've socially constructed race because on the inside, you and I are the same. There's no difference. The amount of pigment that we have in our skin is a ridiculously trivial biological fact that should not impact the way that we treat each other as human beings. Yet it does in today's society for many people. And I think in the process of doing that, oppressed peoples in that game that we've set up to try and rise in social standing in our societies can sometimes step over other people on the way.
Yeah, you're right about that. And again, that happens not just from a racial perspective, an ethnic perspective. It happens from a gender perspective, from a nationality perspective, right? It happens from a number of perspectives because we have this human desire to want to belong and to want to be, right, a part of something. And anytime you feel like you're not a part of that, it's kind of like, well, what is it that I need to do to be a part of that? And I know, just speaking from my own personal experience, I am a very proud dark-skinned Black woman. And I often tell people, if I had to die, right, had the option to die, well, I am going to die. So not if I die, but I tell people this all the time, that if, let's say I had the opportunity to die and the creator said, Andréa, you can go back as, any race, ethnicity, gender, anything you want, how would you choose to go back to it, into physical form? And I say all the time that I would still come back a dark-skinned Black woman exactly as I am. And I said that to say that when I was 13 years old, that is when I stopped disliking my dark skin. And it was from that moment on that I began to fall in love with my dark skin, love all things dark skin, and just embrace it. And the reason why I did that is because Tupac, who was one of the greatest rappers, and even though he is dead and has been dead for, oh my gosh, I can't believe, like 24 years, which is crazy, to me will go down in history as like the greatest rapper. He had a song called Keep Your Head Up. And the song starts out, they say, the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, the darker the flesh, and the deeper the roots. And I remember when I heard that song, like something in me just like completely lit up. And I remember looking down like at my hands and just being like, oh my gosh, the darker the berry, sweet, the darker the flesh, the deep, like, oh my gosh, like I am rooted in something. And that's when I really began to believe in myself, because up to that point, like people had called me, well, first of all, I was called nigger in kindergarten because we went to a suburban school. But then we moved from a suburban school to like a neighborhood school where it was predominantly Black. And, people had teased me for, called me Blackie and teased me for being dark skinned and told me that I was ugly. And these are other Black people who said these things about me. And so, of course, as you can imagine, you kind of develop a complex about that. So it's like the complex started with like not being accepted by the white people, but then not being accepted by the Black people. So it's like, well, where do I go? What do I do? Right. But remembering how that felt, I was like, oh my gosh. First of all, I'm going to love myself. Learn how to love myself, because at 13, what do you even know about love to begin with, right? But as much as I could to my ability, learn to love myself and then fall in love with everyone who is my skin tone and share that love with them, because I wasn't the only dark-skinned person that was teased. I mean, my sister was teased, my other dark-skinned friends, we were all teased, and we were teased by other Black kids. But here's the kicker. Those other Black kids learn how to tease us who have fairer skin because their parents were teasing their dark-skinned friends who teased their dark-skinned friends, and then going back generations upon generations where the grandmother who was fairer skinned said to the darker skinned child, "You're cute to be dark skinned." Right. And so setting up this conflict within families, and even way before that, in the Black community, they called what's called like the paper bag test, the brown paper bag test. I don't know. Have you heard of that? The brown paper bag test? Okay. So, like the brown paper bags that your parents used to put your school lunch in back in the day. So in the Black community, because again, going back to what we were saying, wanting to have this sense of belonging and feeling like you were something or someone, they created these different societies. And the way to be accepted into these societies, they would hold up a paper bag to your skin. If you were lighter than the paper bag, then you were socially acceptable and accepted into their society. If you were darker than the paper bag, then you were rejected from society.
I didn't pay a whole lot of attention in biology in high school, but there's one thing I do remember about genetics and color. And that's that, depending on the genes that are contributed by the mother and the father, the result, and you've probably seen this in friends and family, and I've seen it in friends as well, the resulting color of the children can be completely random because it's on a scale that's randomly assigned by the genes that you inherit. So we're not even talking about something that's like social class or ethnicity or culture. We're talking about something that's completely random.
Yes. And that's the thing, though, because you'd have families. Well, like even in my family, I have a daughter and I have a son. My daughter is maybe a shade or two darker than me, and my son is like 3 shades lighter than me. But both my husband and I are around the same shade. And it's like, we don't know how come my son is like the lightest one in the family. Like, we don't know how that happened because like you said, it really truly is all random. And not only that, and I think the term is like gene skipping. And this happens with everyone where it will like whatever happens, whatever your genes are, it'll skip a generation. And so it's like, if your grandma had blue eyes, your mom had brown eyes and your dad had brown eyes, you could have blue eyes because your grandma had the blue eyes and it skipped a generation, it skipped your mother or whatever. I mean, it's the same thing that happens in all families, not just like I said, not just Black families. So the fact that they would use a paper bag to determine whether or not someone is accepted or basically rejected. I mean, if you think about that, think about the impact that had on people and others in the Black community, especially those with darker skin. But again, this is not just specific to Black people because I went to high school with some Mexican people and there were some Mexicans who were darker than me. Like they were Mexican, proud to be Mexican. They were darker than me. And then I had some Mexican friends who were lighter than even white people. And they were also like full-blooded Mexican. And the ones who were darker, like they got talked about, they got teased. I mean, all of these things happened to them, but they're all Mexican.
And throughout Latin America, there's another aspect, and that's, how European versus how indigenous. And that's the system of colorism and classism that's been set up there. And what occurs to me while you're talking about all this is ultimately who does all this infighting benefit?
Exactly.
Benefits us, right?
Yes.
Benefits we as people of European descent, because the less fighting y'all doing with us and the more fighting you all doing with each other, the less trouble we got, right? And the more
Exactly. And I think that's what people need to understand because, we hear a lot of people talking about, Black on Black crime, which is not a thing. Okay. It is so not a thing. Like, I think according to the government data in either 2015 or 2016, the rate of like Blacks killing Blacks was like 93%. And the rate of whites killing whites, guess what it was?
Close to 100. Right?
Well, you know what? It might have gone up by now with all the mass shootings. But it was at like 88%. The point is that people kill in communities in which they live, right?
Well, and I can't speak to the statistics. I haven't studied them. I don't know them. I'm not an expert. But what I know is that Black on Black crime is just simply a dog whistle for racists to be able to say, hey, look, it's not our problem, it's their problem. And what this whole podcast is about is how do we address white centricity and white supremacy as a human problem?
Exactly.
Instead. And to stop saying, why is this my issue? And that's how, you and I, in discussing this episode, I asked you the honest question. If what we're trying to do is address good-willed, good-hearted white people out there who are trying to learn, why should they care about colorism? Mm-hmm. And you answered that very eloquently, and you schooled me on that.
I did. Yes, I did.
It was an honest question, and I was asking it from, okay, let's make sure we're serving the public that we're trying to serve with our podcast. But I thought your answer was excellent. And it's because Which was
what? What was my answer? Let's put it all out there so people can understand how it works. Like this is real life, right? We've already established that we're not going to necessarily agree on things. We've established that stupid things are going to be said. And yes, your question was honest, but it was still from a place of privilege. But I'll let you finish telling the... Go ahead.
Well, so my interpretation of your response was, firstly, it's about being a human being. And the more we can understand about anyone else's human experience makes us better people. That's my interpretation. And I agree with that 100%. And the other one I had to laugh at a little bit is like, why should anyone care about any yo gay shit then?
Well, I didn't say it like that, Christopher. Come on now.
You didn't, but it's right. We have to care about each other's issues. And from... and we're going to discuss this more in the next episode when we get to talking about, unconscious bias and microaggressions. At the end of the day, it's really just about treating each other as individuals and building relationships with one another in which instead of I don't want to say fetishizing, but generalizing, stereotyping somebody else and say, oh, you're pretty for a dark-skinned Black girl, right?
Right.
or saying, where are you from? Because that's what this kind of things we're going to talk about.
Yep.
Instead, have a relationship with someone that's based on authenticity and genuine caring for who they are and what their experience is as a human being. And then we learn so much more and our lives are so much richer for it.
Yeah. And, I do want to say that anytime you question, kind of going back to, your question of, why should, listeners care about colorism? And my response was that that's actually a question of privilege. It's like, why wouldn't you want to learn about something that impacts all of us? Right. Mm-hmm. Because to the point that you said earlier, it's like, as long as like people of color, there's the infighting, then white folks can be like, oh, nope, that's not me. They ain't got nothing to do with me. Right. But that's a position of privilege where you can even sit back and say, it's got nothing to do with me. Right. And so it's important for all of us to care about all of the issues, right? It's important for us to care about racism, colorism, xenophobia. Like, these things are important because we are all human beings. And really, when we become apathetic to these issues, it actually says more about us than it does the person whom we are apathetic towards.
Well, and it takes me back to your process as a 13-year-old girl, and what you went through and the experience you described, where, everyone, insulting you and picking on you for who they are. Children are generally considered to be pretty cruel.
Yep.
They don't learn it from nowhere. They learn it from somewhere, right? And all of that is an outer manifestation of an inner process. And I think you described that so eloquently about, I don't know if you felt like you ever teased or bullied anyone for those reasons. Do you think you did?
No, because I've always been a sensitive person. I've always been a very sensitive person. And I know some of y'all might not believe this, but as a child, I was extremely shy. Like, I legit, Christopher, I kept to myself. I didn't bother anybody. I didn't say anything to anybody. Like, the one complaint, if you will, that my mother always got from my teachers during like conference is that she's so quiet. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't participate. We know that she knows this stuff because she gets all 100%. She gets everything correct. She just doesn't participate. And so I didn't tease a lot of people just because I just wasn't that type of kid. Like, I wasn't mean to anybody. I was really sensitive. I was really shy, but I just knew what I felt like when I was on the other end of that. And I think that it was necessary for me to experience that because I understood that, wait a minute, you don't even have to like do anything to anyone to receive their attacks.
Yep, true. And I think, that's one way that we as human beings can grow up and behave. In my case, I would say growing up as someone who was aware of the fact that I was gay at a very early age, I was sensitive as a child as well. I'm also a pretty big white guy, and I could get away if I wasn't feeling really great about myself sometimes, then I'm aware of the fact that I could take it out on other people too, especially when I was young and act out. And I actually remember getting hauled into counseling in 6th grade for that, which was about the time I was awakening to my sexual orientation.
Right.
So I'm very aware of the fact that sometimes when we don't feel good about ourselves, we can take that out on other people. And I think that's a really universal human trait. And I suspect that's part of what colorism in all its different forms and colors is probably about as well.
Yeah. And, because the truth is, like, colorism, racism, all of the isms, sexism, even, it really stems from the idea of something being superior and something being inferior. You know what I mean? There's the superiority and there's the inferiority, right? Sexism, male superior, female, inferior, right? And so when in communities of color, light skin being superior, dark skin being inferior. In situations of race, which is a social construct, like white being superior, blacks and people of color being inferior, right? And so when we think about that as we move forward and we think about this idea of decentering whiteness, because I suspect, and again, I'm no expert and this is not scientifically proven, I don't know, but I suspect that when we begin to decenter whiteness, then all of the isms will begin to crumble right along with it.
I pray and hope and hold a vision for that being the truth. What I suspect is what we're seeing right now in our society, and talking about the end of 2020, is that as a result of the attempt to decenter whiteness, all those isms are coming out of the woodwork like crazy. And that, we have a pendulum of, I'm completely convinced that I am in a superior dominant position in society and I feel safe, to now I'm freaked out that the demographic of this country is changing. People of color are getting more power. And I had a voice in the White House for 4 years that was giving me permission to be unkind and cruel to people who aren't exactly like me and don't think exactly what I'm like. And the only thing I can pray for is that the nature of things in society in general is that we swing back to a more sane and balanced position where at the end of the day, what it's all about is if people are doing the inner work to resolve, and I know this is your life's work and your coaching business, and where you help so many people to resolve those old issues so that they can move forward. We all have our own inner work to do. And then once we do, all those isms fall away. Once we're not afraid of people around us being different, and once we let go of the fallacy that we are going to be, mistreated, abused, taken, people are going to take what's ours, all those kind of fallacies that we've set up in our minds that have created the sort of mess that we're in right now, we can get back to being loving, compassionate human beings who treat each other, authentically, curiously, kindly, compassionately, which is as a Christian man, that's really where I hope we go as a society, and where I know many kind-hearted people, regardless of their beliefs, hope that we need to go now.
Yeah. And, at the end of the day, the hope of this podcast and the hope of like the work that I do, my life's mission, is that people ultimately go within themselves. Because what happens when you go within is you begin to, first of all, examine all of the beliefs that you hold. And once you examine those beliefs, then you can begin to challenge those beliefs, right? And because I fundamentally believe that the universe conspires to support us, then we will begin to experience what a challenged belief looks like, which will then give us the opportunity to decide whether or not we want to hold on to this belief or whether we want to let it go because it doesn't serve us. Because when you go within yourself, you realize that I am no different than my brother and my sister.
Yep. A life unexamined is not worth living.
It isn't. And when you look at it, you say, I am no different than my brother and my sister. And ultimately, what I do to them, I'm doing it to myself. And so if I want to only show love to myself and respect myself and be loyal to myself and show up authentically for myself, then I want to do the same thing for my brothers and my sisters, because we are one.
Exactly. And that is the law of all spiritual work and inner healing is if I want to learn to be more kind and compassionate with myself, there's two ways I can do that. I can do that work directly internally. I can meditate. I can, I can have a spiritual practice. There's so many things I can do, or I can just go about being that way with other people in the world. And guess what? The deeper psyche doesn't know the difference. You're still doing the work.
Yep.
So, with regards to decentering whiteness, again, at the end of the day, it's about how can you do the inner work that you need to do to be a kind, loving, compassionate human being to yourself. And when you're really honestly doing that, there's no way you can't be that way with other people.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. And that's part of the reason why I don't. And a lot of people, they wonder, like, Andréa, like, how can you like sit in the room with racist people and not be mad and not be upset? Or how can you even like have these kind of conversations? Like, they need to do their own work and all of that. And to that, I say, I use compassion, right? Because I fundamentally understand that if they decide that they don't like me, even though they don't know me, based on the color of my skin, then that tells me that at a much deeper level, that's hate they have towards themselves. And so you cannot fight hate with hate, just like you can't fight anger with anger and, fear with fear. The only way, because Einstein said a problem can't be solved at the same level of consciousness that created it. And so if we decide that we want to solve a problem, and to be clear, I am not saying that it is Black people's responsibility to educate white people. I want everybody to be clear, right? But what I am saying, for me and my life, I just understand that any hate towards me or any hate towards anyone, there is an even deeper and greater hate towards self. And so I would rather show love, which is shining the light on that which is darkness, because the darkness cannot argue with the light, just like hate cannot argue with love. So I would rather choose love as my weapon of choice, because love will always win. And so to the listeners, if you do have any issues with people of color, or you are wondering, like Christopher's question was at the beginning, which was an honest question, why should you care? Then the question becomes, why shouldn't you care? Why shouldn't you care?
Yep, exactly.
So,
and I see that same phenomenon happening with all of the closeted LGBT people out there who are incredible haters. And we have such an incredible list of politicians in the US. And recently there was a case from ambassador staff from Hungary who participated in the prime minister's incredible efforts to persecute gay people in that country, and it ended up getting caught by US authorities at an orgy with like 24 other guys. And he crawled out on the balcony, escaped through the window, like buck naked. The level of self-hatred in that particular case with closeted LGBT people, I think, is a really good analogy for, if you can't love yourself, then very often you outproject that internal hatred towards others. And you're right that embracing those people and showing them, hey, it doesn't have to be like that. You can love yourself. And in loving yourself, you can stop this hatred towards other people in the world who are actually exactly like you.
Yeah. And to be clear, like, love is not necessarily like, oh, come here, dear, let me hug you up. No, love is being honest and truthful, right? Like when I sit in the room with people who are racist or have issues with racism or whatever, I'm not all like, come here, pretty sneaky baby, let me love you up. I'm like, well, let's talk about this, right? I'm shining the light on the darkness. And I'm like, well, why do you care? Why is this important to you? You know what I mean? And so that's also love. It's not just, like a garden of roses and tulips. No, because there's mud, there's water. We need the sun. We need all of this in order for us to show up authentically. And so again, when I say that, I use love. Again, it's not just this, oh, everything's going to be okay. It's like, no, let's have a real conversation about it. And let's examine where you are.
Well, and what a message for our times right now when we're so polarized as well. Because the way that I experience personally what you're talking about, whether it be talking to other white people about race or talking to homophobic people about being gay, that love for me manifests itself as holding a place of center within myself, where I am in a place of non-judgment for me, for myself, or for the people around me.
Exactly.
Still able to speak my truth through that without making them wrong, without and coming really, again, curiosity and compassion with other people can solve 9/10 of all the ills on this planet.
Yes. And that's also why it's important for white people, if they do have questions, get to know people of color. Don't just like not know them and ask them these questions, because again, that's catching them off guard too. So it's like, if you really are curious, if you're truly curious, then you need to get to know them so that they know that you're coming from a genuine place and not a place to kind of poke pins or poke holes. And again, we're going to talk about microaggressions and implicit bias later, but get to know them. And so then, like, when you asked your question, I didn't think you were being all like anything. I knew that it was coming from a real place, but I also answered you from a real, genuine place also, right?
And you know what my reaction was to that? And I hope that this is illustrative for other people. As dedicated as I am to this mission, when you responded to me that way, I felt incredible discomfort welling up physically inside me. And I felt a desire to want to defend and respond. And I can be honest about that because I'm self-aware. And what I know and what I'm committed to doing in that situation is to suffer through the discomfort, to open my heart, and to listen. Hey, tell me more about that perspective and why you think I need to look at that. And that's, Andréa, that's what I love about you, and being a mirror for me, is that you are demanding of me, which I never want you to stop being.
I won't. Don't worry.
You are compassionate with me when I'm struggling with something that I'm blind to. And so thank you for being my, my teacher in those situations. And for being every once in a while, even if you ain't in the mood, the Department of Caucasian Education.
Just for you, boo. Just for you, boo.
And I hope that this relationship is going to bless and educate so many other people as well.
Yes. So thank you all for listening. Let us know if you have any questions. We'd love to know your thoughts on colorism. Let us know, is it the first time you've heard it? I mean, some of you have heard it, but have never thought to research it. And I still want to encourage you to do your own research, do additional research, because as Christopher and I say, we're not experts. And as much reading as I can do, I am still kind of limited to my own personal experience as to what I can share with you, because just like Christopher doesn't speak for all white people, I don't speak for all Black people, and I certainly don't speak for any other person of color. So do your own research and let us know if y'all have any questions.
And continue to be curious and compassionate out there in the world with your fellow human beings and with yourself.
Yes. We'll talk to y'all later.
Peace out.